One clue overlooked for years could solve everything. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I am your host, Vela. Tell me your location. Your presence matters here. Together we start the tale. On a morning when London's fog had the complexion of watered milk, and the cabs moved along Baker Street like beetles in a glass jar, Dr. Watson sat by the grate at number 221B and watched the coal surrender in small red sighs. Holmes, in his purple dressing gown, had set his violin upon the mantel and was engaged in an experiment which involved 3 small glass phials, a lump of beeswax, and the ashes from the previous night's fire. He moved with that unhurried delicacy which in him always presaged violent action. "Cigarette ash, my dear fellow," said he, without lifting his eyes. "Our housemaid gathers it with the tact of a cavalry charge. Note the admixture of peppered soot, straight from our own flue. What is wanted here is separation. Observe!" He decanted a pinch of grey powder from the shovel onto the beeswax and pressed it with the flat side of his knife. A fine crescent of pale ash slid free as neatly as a stamp from a corner. Now, if Mrs. Hudson would but allow me to label her dustpan, a sharp knock, 3 brisk taps, sounded at the street door. It was followed by a single heavy foot upon the stair, and the unmistakable rattle of a stick against the banister. Inspector Lestrade's narrow figure appeared in the doorway, almost before Mrs. Hudson could knock upon ours. "Morning. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson?" He removed his hat with an air that was neither apology nor triumph. "You've a taste for puzzles. I've the very dish for you." Holmes glanced at the clock, 5 minutes past 9, then at the violin as though it had interrupted him. "Pray be seated, Inspector. You will find the chair by the window suited to a man of your constitution. The cushion has been recently beaten. You may therefore avoid an unnecessary sneeze. Your errand is urgent and not merely official." Lestrade gave a quick, irritated smile. "Now how? Your right cuff bears droplet marks at an angle that bespeaks a brisk walk without umbrella, while the left is free of them. Your case kept it in that hand. You feared to surrender it, a matter then that touches your credit at the Yard. You are also early, which smacks of a corpse before breakfast. Let us have it." Lestrade's thin lips twitched. "You'll say locked room and smirk at me." "A barrister, Mr. Percival Ashe, found dead in his chambers at Lincoln's Inn at 7:30 this morning. A single thrust with a blade, so the surgeon says, just here." He touched his breastbone. The door bolted from the inside. The window latched, and the fireplace too narrow for anything larger than a cat. I'll not pretend it doesn't look impossible. Watson felt the old tingle he had come to associate with Holmes's cases. The fog pressed itself against the panes like a listening ear. "Who found him?" Holmes asked. His clerk, one Henry Pike. "Came early to fetch a brief. Ash was to argue at the Chancery today. The lad swears he knocked repeatedly. No answer. Summoned the porter, and they forced the door. It was bolted, no doubt of that. Ash was slumped at the desk, a paper knife under his hand and blood soaking his waistcoat. The knife itself, ornamental with a mother-of-pearl hilt, was on the carpet at his feet, not under his hand. "Then," Holmes murmured, and his long fingers wandered to the mantel, where lay a small brown paper parcel that had come with the morning post. He turned it idly, noting the coarse twine and a smudge of blue chalk upon the paper. "You will tell me," said Lestrade, "that he stabbed himself and arranged the room to confound us. I would accept it and be home by dinner, only there is a card, a visiting card." Holmes's eyes brightened. "Ah?" "Pinned to the curtain with a brass paper fastener. E.M. is all it says. No name, no address. And the strangest thing, one wet mark on the sill, half a print of a lady's boot, small and neat, and no other dampness in the room." "It hasn't rained since last evening." Holmes gave the faintest of laughs, no more than the exhalation of a mind amused with itself. "You overwhelm me, Inspector, with your attention to footwear. Pray proceed. There is also—" Lestrade hesitated, producing a silk handkerchief in which something small and gleaming lay secreted. With a flick he revealed a button, mother of pearl to match the knife's hilt, its shank bent as though wrenched. found beneath the chair. And the hearthrug's edge has a smear, could be candle grease. The clerk Pike is as white as chalk, swears he knows nothing of any EM. We have him at the station. Until we've sorted the matter. Holmes stretched his long legs and regarded the ceiling as though the answer had been written in the hairline cracks. A barrister slain within a locked chamber. A lady's half-print. An initialed card. A mother-of-pearl button. Cousin to a paper knife. And grease upon the rug, candle or sealing wax. You are not certain. I am not, said Lestrade with asperity. Then we shall become so. Holmes rose, and as he did, his sleeve brushed the brown paper parcel upon the mantel. It shifted, almost fell. He caught it with that lightning hand, which rarely missed what it desired. He frowned at the address, inked with the regularity of a clerk. Mr. S. Holmes, or his doctor, 221B Baker Street, and then, with a shrug of indifference, set it back among the litter. You have admirers who are uncertain which of us is the more instructive, I observed. A matter for the post, said he. We will open it when we have earned the right to be interrupted. Lestrade's stick rattled upon the rug as he stood. You will come, then? With pleasure. One question only. What of Mr. Ash's habits? Drink, debts, ladies? Respected in his profession, cold fish, if you ask me. A widower. No debts we can see, no mistresses we can prove. He had two significant cases. The Mortlake Trust, something about a contested will, and a matter for the Admiralty concerning lighthouse contracts. Dry stuff, but it makes enemies. The Mortlake Trust, Holmes repeated softly, as though the words had a flavour. And do you, by any happy chance, carry upon your person the visiting card? Lestrade produced it at once. It was plain Bristol board, crisp and new, bearing only the letters EM in a neat copper-plate hand. Holmes held it to the light, then to the fire, and finally breathed upon it. A faint bloom appeared, no more than a shadow in the fibres. Very good, said he, passing it to me. You perceive, Watson. Nothing beyond the initials, I confessed. Exactly. That is the interesting part. Come, the fog is a companion to deceit, and we shall need our wits if we are to see through both. He took up his Inverness cape and deerstalker, and we descended to the street, where the day had resolved itself into two colours, black and white, like the charred residue upon Holmes's beeswax. As we entered the hansom, I glanced back at the mantel. The brown parcel sat primly among the files and the violin bow, its blue chalk smear a trifling blemish amid our disorder. Holmes, I said. That parcel will keep, my dear fellow, he returned, already peering through the trap to direct the driver. At present the city waits upon us. Lincoln's Inn, quickly, and a shilling more if you make the lamps of Holborn before past. The cab lurched forward, and in a moment Baker Street was swallowed by the fog. I confess there was that in my breast which the reader will forgive, a pleasurable apprehension. The old soldiers stir at the call to action, for the very shape of the affair promised those qualities which made Holmes's cases at once a trial and a delight. Simplicity on the surface, and beneath it an arrangement of parts so cunning that one could not say where illusion ended and fact began. Holborn's lamps emerged and vanished like fireflies as we drove. Holmes sat with chin upon breast, hands clasped, a statue of concentration. Once he spoke. Lestrade, you will oblige me by sending word to the yard that Mr. Ash's clerk is to be treated with courtesy. He is, if I mistake not, a timid youth, whose hands will tell us more than his tongue. Any noise will send the truth scurrying into whatever hole he has provided for it. I shall do as you ask, said the inspector, though without enthusiasm. And, Watson, when next you are in our rooms, remind me of the brown parcel. There is a trifle about it that offends me. Nothing to do with this case, no doubt, and yet— He paused and smiled in that dry fashion of his, which made me wish to shake him and salute him in equal measure. Well, we shall see. It is a peculiar thing in the history of our adventures, how often the smallest object, an ink smudge, a torn stamp, the twist of a string, has set us upon the right path when the grandest evidences would not speak. I could not know then that the overlooked parcel on our mantle, with its chalky smear, would enter this affair as quietly as a cat and with claws as sharp. For the present, the locked chamber at Lincoln's Inn awaited us, and in that solemn nest of the law, where men split hairs into halves and call it justice, there lay a man who had been stabbed by a blade which, if the world were sensible, should never have pierced anything more grievous than a brief. Lincoln's Inn has a sobriety all its own, a hush that clings to stone and lawn alike, as if the trees themselves had been called to the bar. We passed through the arch, the cab wheels rasping upon the gravel, and were met by a porter, whose face bore that impassive gravity common to men who have seen every human extremity pass before their lodge, and counted each as a mere entry in a ledger. Lestrade exchanged a few low words with him, and led us across the quadrangle to a narrow stair where the air was colder, and smelt faintly of ink and disuse. "Ash's chambers are at the top," he said, and the steps proved as close as the inspector's statement, tight, steep, and worn with centuries of ascent. At the landing the door in question stood open, the lock splintered where the porter's crow had bitten it. Holmes paused just outside, head bent, and ran one long finger along the inner face of the moulding, as a man might play an invisible harp. Satisfied, he stepped inside with that curious feline tread of his, which both avoided and invited attention. It was a gentleman's working room of the driest stamp, a high window overhanging the inn gardens, a grate with a coal fire burned to a grey thought, books massed in ranks as rigid as a parade, a great knee-hole desk whose leather top bore the wounds of years. Ash himself had been removed, but the mark of his presence remained in the dark bloom upon the Turkey carpet, and in the straight-backed chair, pushed back at an angle that suggested its occupant had recoiled rather than risen. "The bolt?" Holmes asked. Lestrade indicated the brass slide upon the door. "Snapped back when we forced it. No other entrance. Window latched." Holmes crossed to the window and examined the sash, then the latch, then the sill. He bent, and I saw his nostrils dilate. "A faint suggestion of iodine," he murmured. "And here the half-print you mentioned." He did not touch it. Rather, he hovered his hand and let his eye do the fingering. "Very pretty. The heel is clipped close. No fashionable Louis to carve the earth. A boot made to be walked in, not admired. A practical lady. Note, Watson, the way the moisture has dried on the outer edge first. The print was set when the air in the room was warmer than at present." Lestrade, who detested being tutored, kept his temper by force. "And the card?" Holmes went to the curtain and found the brass fastener, where it had pinned a small rectangle of Bristol to the fabric. The curtain, I observed, did not reach fully to the floor, and its hem was darkened by some transfer of grime. Holmes studied the hole the fastener had made, then the wooden sash beyond. "You removed it?" he asked. "With care," Lestrade said. "Gloves and all." Holmes's mouth twitched. "Gloves are very well when one can afford to forego sensation. What of the paper knife?" Lestrade pointed. The mother-of-pearl hilt glimmered on the carpet, an ornament unsuited to blood. Holmes took it up with his handkerchief and tilted the blade. Blunt to a degree, it could kill if used with force, yet it would not pierce a waistcoat cleanly without bruising. He touched the hilt to his cuff. A whisper of white dust spread upon the black cloth. "Bone meal or chalk? No, we shall reserve judgment. Where is the clerk?" "In the next room," said Lestrade, shaking still for all I know. Holmes knelt by the hearth-rug, where the edge had been turned back slightly and a dull smear shone in the weak light. He sniffed, then touched a match to the grate's lingering coals and held it near. The smear took the heat without melting. "Not candle grease," he said. "Stearine mixed with a resin, sealing wax's cousin, perhaps. And the rug's nap is crushed in a neat line here, do you see? As though a cord lay upon it and was removed." "Cord?" I repeated. "From what to what?" "That is the sort of question I encourage, Watson, for it assumes there are 2 points to be connected. His eyes travelled up to the ceiling, where a faint discoloration circled the bell pull like a halo. He tugged the pull lightly. The wire within the wall gave no complaint. A knock sounded, and a young man with the pinched look of the underfed and the conscientious appeared in the doorway, his hair a conspiracy against order. "Henry Pike," Lestrade said. "Tell Mr. Holmes what you told me." The youth swallowed. "I came at 7, sir. Earlier by a quarter, perhaps. Mr. Ashe expects me before 8 when there is court. The door was fast. I knocked 3 times, then more. When no answer came, I fetched Mr. Jameson, the porter. He forced it. Mr. Ashe sat like he was reading, sir, only he wasn't. He clenched and unclenched his fingers. There was blood. I never saw anything like it." "You have ink upon your thumb," Holmes observed, not unkindly, "and the faintest smirch of red wax on your cuff. Ashe sealed his letters with a crest?" "With his signet, sir, an anchor and star. He sealed 3 last night. I left at 9. Who had access to these rooms?" "Only Mr. Ashe and me. Clients never waited here. He met them at their clubs or chambers. The charwoman comes Tuesdays and Fridays at 6. This is Wednesday." Holmes looked to the desk. It held many papers in tidy stacks, but its centre was cleared save for a blotter, a heavy glass paperweight containing a twist of some marine plant, and a small key upon a ribbon. He lifted the blotter and peered at its underside. "The last page he wrote upon is missing. Do you miss it?" Pike spread his hands. He took the brief home to read. He said he would draft a note to Mr. Mortlake's solicitor in the morning. "The Mortlake Trust?" I asked. "Yes, doctor. There is to be argument regarding a codicil." Holmes held the small key to the light. "To what does this belong?" Pike pointed to a shallow drawer in the desk's centre. It slid, and within lay envelopes addressed in Ashe's neat, uncompromising hand. One was unsealed. Holmes drew it out. "To Edward Mortlake. Squans," I read, and felt the hair rise along my arms. As foolish a sensation as any. E.M. the letters on the card. "You begin to see how the obvious is sometimes the least certain," Holmes said. He did not open the letter. Instead, he weighed it in his palm, then returned it to the drawer and locked it with the key. "Inspector, keep that secure. If its contents are urgent to another man, they may prove urgent to us." Lestrade grunted assent. Holmes moved once more to the window. He unlatched it and raised the sash an inch, then 2, listening as if windows had tongues. A draught passed and the curtain's hem trembled. He dropped to his knees and peered along the skirting board. "Watson, your lens." I handed him the instrument I always carry at his prompting. He applied it to a point where the board met the sill, then smiled thin and quick. "A scrape here, the varnish lifted fresh." Something taut passed through the crack to the outside, drawn abruptly. "And there, do you see? A faint thread, almost hair-fine." He took it upon his nail and set it upon my palm. It was near invisible until it caught the light. Horsehair or silk, hard to say. "A string?" Lestrade cried. "What? Some trick to pull the bolt?" "The bolt is within," Holmes said, rising. "But a string may do many things besides the one you imagine. Picture a loop drawn over an object. But we shall not build our house before we have our bricks." He turned, his gaze raking the room once more. "Where is Ashe's walking stick?" Pike blinked. "He left it yesterday in the umbrella stand below. He seldom brought it up. And his hat?" "In the stand likewise." "Then he did not mean to go out early," Holmes said softly. "He expected a visitor or a communication. The iodine at the sill suggests a bottle opened here. Medical men employ it. So do those who must test for the presence of certain inks. A lady's half-print that is half-dry. A card with initials that are half a name. A button that is cousin to a knife hilt, but not brother to Ashe's coat." He tapped the bent mother-of-pearl shank still resting on the mantel. "Whose garment, then, yields such buttons?" "Not a gentleman's day wear. A lady's bodice, or yes, a certain type of evening cloak." "Are you saying a woman killed him?" Lestrade demanded. "I am saying only that a woman stood by this window not long after a draught warmed the air." Holmes's eyes wandered to the bell pull again. Pike, did anyone ever complain of rats? In these chambers? No, sir. Then the gnaw upon that pull is not vermin. He placed his fingertip upon a small fray just above the tassel. A loop bit here and was jerked free. It explains our line upon the rug and the scrape at the sill, though it does not explain the bolt. For that we require either an accomplice or a device. The accomplice would have left us more than half a heel. He straightened, and the quicksilver animation that comes to him when he scents a pattern visibly seized him. Inspector, we shall need the porter who helped you force the door, the charwoman on her Friday, Mr. Mortlake's address, and a list of every brief Ash argued in the last 6 months. And, Watson, be so good as to lift the hearth rug entirely. If my nose does not lie, there is a triangle of lighter pile beneath, where something used to sit and has been removed within the last day. I obeyed, and indeed the wool showed a ghostly geometry, a space where a small stand or tripod might have rested. Holmes smiled again, no warmth in it but an austere satisfaction, like a theorem proved to his own exacting mind. Tripods, he said mildly, belong to surveyors, to photographers, and to men who wish to make the air do what their hands cannot. We will ask the porter about visitors with cases long enough to conceal legs. Lestrade threw up his hands. You see ghosts everywhere, Mr. Holmes. Ghosts? Holmes returned. No, cables, pulleys, and people. The dead man had enemies in the world of paper and seal. The world of string will assist us in making their acquaintance. He turned to Pike. You will do nothing without telling the inspector. You will touch nothing and speak to no one about E.M. Do you understand? The youth nodded, his Adam's apple jumping. Holmes clapped his shoulder once, a rare caress, and moved to the door. Come, gentlemen. While ink dries here, it may still be wet elsewhere. The porter, Jameson, was a broad-shouldered fellow with a nose flattened by long service in quarrels not always verbal. He met us at the threshold, cap in hand, and looked at Holmes with a wary respect that suggested past acquaintance. Holmes, however, was already speaking before the man could summon a word. You forced the door. Describe exactly what you observed. Jameson scratched his chin. Beg pardon, sir. The clerk there was near weeping. Said Mr. Ash wouldn't answer. I put my shoulder to the panel, and with the crow we cracked it. The bolt was shot right enough. The gentleman was sitting stiff, head low, like he'd dropped asleep at his papers. There was a knife by his feet and blood, more than I'd wish to see again. He shifted uneasily. Curtain was still swaying a touch. Window tight, though. Still swaying? Holmes asked quickly. Aye, sir. Not a draught in that place else. But the hem twitched like someone had brushed past it. Thought no more of it till the inspector pointed the card out. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Very precise, Jameson. And before you forced the door, was there sound within? None, still as a tomb, barring the clerk's pounding. Holmes inclined his head. So you have an honest memory, and I may call upon it again. He dismissed the man with a gesture and turned to Lestrade. The curtain swaying is consistent with the hairline we discovered, Watson. Something had only just been withdrawn, I ventured. Yet the bolt precisely, the heart of the puzzle, the force that entered left by artifice, not the common exit. We quitted the chambers, leaving Lestrade to his notes, and stepped into the cold quadrangle. The fog was lifting in streaks. A pale sun bled through, thin and watery. Holmes thrust his hands deep into his coat pockets and strode so swiftly that I was forced into a trot. He halted suddenly before the porter's lodge, where the umbrella stand was kept. Observe, Watson. He lifted Ash's stick, a plain Malacca cane tipped with silver, dust upon the crook, no mark of recent handling. His hat likewise is film-coated. He had no design to leave these rooms after his clerk departed last night, and yet he admitted, or expected to admit, a visitor. E.M., I said, or a false E.M. The distinction may hang a man. He replaced the articles and turned to Jameson, who had followed us down. In the last week, did you notice any caller with a case long enough to hide tripod legs? The porter frowned. Yesterday near dusk a fellow came, dark beard, foreign look to him, carried a leather case tall as his shoulder, said he had business with Mr. Ash. I thought it queer, but he went straight up the stair. Didn't stay long, 10 minutes maybe. When he come down, he tipped his hat and left. Couldn't say if Mr. Ashe saw him. Holmes's expression sharpened. A foreigner, with a surveyor's or photographer's case. And you tell me nothing of this until now? You never asked, sir. True, Holmes murmured, and I saw the fire kindle in his gaze. We left Lincoln's Inn and hailed a cab. Inside, Holmes was sunk in thought, his long fingers steepled. At last he spoke. You noted, Watson, the tripod impression upon the rug. A device was mounted there. With a cord run to the window and another to the bell pull, it could create a simulacrum of action. A bolt drawn, perhaps, or a body made to fall in precise manner. The button and the card are not decorations but signals, meant for an eye attuned to them. But the murder itself? I pressed. How does one strike down a man behind a locked door and leave unseen? By ensuring the door is bolted after the blow. Whether by mechanical contrivance or the man's own failing strength, that is yet to be decided. He tapped his fingers together. We must see Mr. Mortlake. Our cab drew up at Mortlake House, a fine residence in Bloomsbury. The butler eyed us with cold suspicion, but at the name of Sherlock Holmes his reserve cracked. We were shown into a sombre library, where sat Edward Mortlake himself, a gentleman of middle years, spare as a fence-post, his features pinched with habitual disdain. You intrude upon a busy man, he said when Holmes introduced us. My solicitor, Mr. Ashe, is dead. I suppose that is your errand. Indeed, sir, Holmes replied smoothly. May I inquire as to your last dealings with Mr. Ashe? Mortlake waved a hand. He was preparing my case against certain avaricious relatives who contest my uncle's estate. A pack of wolves, the lot of them. Ashe was thorough, meticulous. I had every confidence he would prevail. Now with him struck down, the affair is thrown into delay and doubt. A tragedy, both personally and legally. Holmes's eyes missed nothing. The ink stains upon Mortlake's fingers, the faint indentation upon his waistcoat where a watch chain had recently been tugged, the scattered documents upon his desk. You received correspondence from him yesterday. A note, yes, to assure me all was in readiness. It lies here. He handed over a folded sheet. Holmes read swiftly, then passed it to me. The hand was Ashe's, cool and precise. It promised that new evidence concerning the contested codicil would render the opposition powerless. Evidence? Holmes asked softly. Of what nature? Mortlake shook his head. He did not say. Only that he had secured it. Holmes stood abruptly, his whole figure taut with resolve. Watson, the net tightens. A man is slain on the eve of producing evidence. A tripod's ghost upon a rug. A stranger with a foreign case. A card that whispers initials which may stand for Mortlake, or for another entirely. The forgotten clue is not in what is present, but in what has been removed. I caught the old thrill again, the sense that we stood upon the very brink of revelation, yet with peril yawning before us. Holmes had already seized his hat. Where now? I asked. To Baker Street, he said. There is a parcel upon our mantel which, I suspect, has ceased to be the trifling thing I dismissed. Before this night ends, Watson, that brown paper package may tell us whether Percival Ashe died for law, for love, or for something fouler still. The cab rattled northward through the thickening fog, its wheels clattering against the stones like the ticking of some monstrous clock. Holmes sat with his chin pressed deep into his scarf, his hands folded as though in prayer, though I knew his mind was in ceaseless motion, turning over the fragments of this dark puzzle. He spoke but once on the journey, and even then half to himself. The tripod's ghost, the thread at the sill, the curtain still swaying, an artifice, Watson, and one practised with uncommon precision. Whoever contrived it did not strike in haste. The hand that killed Ashe had studied the geometry of this chamber long before it acted. When at last we reached Baker Street, Holmes leapt from the cab before it had come to a halt, and mounted the familiar steps in 3 strides. Mrs. Hudson met us in the passage, hands pressed in her apron, her expression drawn. A visitor for you, Mr. Holmes, a lady, waiting this last half-hour. Holmes's brows lifted, but he betrayed no surprise. "In the sitting room." "She is there, sir." Very quiet but agitated all the same. We entered to find a young woman seated in the shadow of the hearth. She rose at once. Her dress, though modest, bore the unmistakable cut of a quality house. Her gloves were worn thin, yet her bearing bespoke refinement. She inclined her head to Holmes with a composure that trembled only at the edges. "You are Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I am Eleanor Mortlake." "Ah," Holmes murmured, casting a swift glance at me. "The initials E.M. take flesh. Pray sit. You come at a fortuitous hour, Miss Mortlake, though I imagine your errand is not a light one." Her eyes, dark and quick like a bird's, flicked from Holmes to me. "You have heard of my uncle's estate. My cousin Edward believes it his by right. But She faltered, and in that hesitation her dignity melted into a younger woman's distress. "I fear Mr. Ashe died because of me." Watson though I was, I could not restrain a cry of protest, but Holmes raised a finger. "Why so?" She clasped her hands tightly in her lap. "Yesterday I received a message from Mr. Ashe. He asked me to meet him privately in his chambers. He wrote that he had discovered something concerning the codicil that might secure my inheritance. He begged my discretion. I went after dusk, but when I arrived the door was locked, and though I knocked he did not answer. I thought perhaps he had repented of our meeting, and I hurried away. This morning I heard he was dead, and then I learned my card had been found there." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Your card?" She nodded, her voice low. "I gave him one months ago. It must have been in his possession. Yet the police say it was pinned to the curtain beside him. As if—" She broke off, the colour draining from her cheeks. "As if you had been present at his death," Holmes finished gravely. "Yes, that is the appearance, but appearances are a poor currency in truth's market. Your initials were meant to mislead Miss Mortlake." Her eyes filled with sudden gratitude. "You believe me, then?" "I believe nothing," said Holmes, "until I see. Yet your arrival coincides with my suspicions. Watson, the parcel—" I turned to the mantel where the brown paper packet still sat, the blue chalk smear dulled in the dim light. Holmes tore the string with a deft twist and unfolded the paper. Inside lay a flat, leather-bound case such as one might use for photographic plates, and within it 3 glass negatives, each wrapped in tissue. Holmes held one to the lamp. A faint image revealed itself, the interior of Ashe's chambers, unmistakable by its window and desk. Another plate showed the same, but from a slightly altered angle. And the third, Holmes drew a sharp breath, depicted the figure of Ashe himself seated at his desk, head bowed as though in slumber, the mother-of-pearl knife already poised upon the blotter before him. The silence in our room was profound. Even the crackle of the fire seemed to retreat. "These were taken with a long exposure," Holmes said softly, "and with a camera mounted on a tripod. The very tripod whose trace I observed upon the rug. We are dealing with a mind that not only slew, but staged the death with theatrical forethought. The parcel was meant for me or for Watson, addressed with uncertainty yet dispatched without signature. Someone desires us to know how it was done, though not by whose hand." Miss Mortlake pressed a hand to her lips. "Then it was murder beyond doubt." "Beyond doubt," Holmes replied. He placed the negatives carefully back in their wrappings. "Murder, contrived so that suspicion should fall upon you." The card was pinned not to identify but to accuse. "Tell me, Miss Mortlake, who among your family has both cause to covet the inheritance and the skill to devise such artifice?" Her gaze faltered. "My cousin Edward is ruthless, but he is no mechanist. There is another, a man employed by him, of foreign birth, who has advised him in certain investments. I met him but once. His name was Vera, I think. He carried a curious case with him, long and narrow, like the one you describe." Holmes's eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction. "The bearded foreigner with the case. We are closing upon him. Yet it is the hand behind the hand we must unmask. For every contriver there is a commander." He rose, pacing swiftly, his shadow thrown long upon the wall. We must act at once. Lestrade must see these photographs, though I shall not entrust them to his custody until I have made my copies. Watson, you will attend Miss Mortlake home. I would not have her abroad alone while her name is made the plaything of a murderer. I shall pay a call upon our friend at Scotland Yard, and perhaps arrange a little experiment in light and cordage. Tonight, when the fog thickens again, the true pattern of this crime may yet be drawn. He stopped abruptly and looked down at the young woman, whose courage, though shaken, still held. Miss Mortlake, fear not. You are but the shadow the villain would cast upon his deed. Before long the sun of truth will dispel it. Her lips trembled into a faint smile, and she rose with quiet dignity. Holmes, ever awkward with such demonstrations, only bowed his head and returned his gaze to the negatives glowing faintly under the lamp. As I escorted her into the street, I glanced back and saw him standing motionless, the thin glass plate in his hand, the light catching his sharp profile like the etching of a hawk about to strike. I knew that in his mind the trap was already being set. It was close upon evening when I returned to Baker Street, having seen Miss Eleanor Mortlake safely to her residence in Bloomsbury. Her composure had strengthened during the drive, but the shadows in her eyes told me how near she was to despair. I promised her, with more conviction than I perhaps possessed, that Holmes would clear her name. She pressed my hand in silence and disappeared into the lamplit doorway of her house. When I climbed the familiar steps of 221B, I found Holmes seated at the table beneath the lamp, the three negatives now printed upon paper by his own rough process. His pipe smouldered at his elbow, and the room bore the faint tang of chemicals. You perceive, Watson, he said without preamble, that the photographs show us more than a reconstruction. They show us a rehearsal. The murderer wished to prove to himself that his contrivance would deceive. Thus the parcel sent to us is less a taunt than a necessity. He needed an audience, if only to confirm his vanity. I studied the prints. In one, Ash's form was blurred by the length of the exposure, but the contours of the desk, the curtain, and the bolt on the door stood sharp and pitiless. In another, the angle revealed the line of the rug with startling clarity. The third, where Ash seemed almost lifelike in his bowed posture, sent a chill through me. It was as if the murderer had wished to capture the very moment of death for posterity. Holmes tapped the edge of the print. Note the angle of light upon the desk. This was no casual amateur with a camera. He understood exposure, balance, and above all, concealment. The tripod legs were placed so that the rug would bear their memory, yet the eye would not at once remark it. A craftsman's touch. Watson, one of those foreigners who ply their trade in shadowed alleys and whose services can be bought by men like Mortlake for a handful of guineas. Do you think Edward Mortlake complicit? I asked. Holmes leaned back, his gaze narrowing. Complicit, or the unwitting patron of a more subtle hand, we must not judge too quickly. Still, it is not the cousin who concerns me most. It is this Vera. The porter's description and Miss Mortlake's recollection point with perfect symmetry to the same man. A bearded foreigner, a case tall enough to house the device, a bearing that betrays one accustomed to hire rather than to birth. I have seen such men before, in Paris, in St. Petersburg, men of science turned mercenary. At that moment Lestrade was announced, his step brisk with suppressed eagerness. He carried his hat under his arm and bore the look of a man who knows he is about to be shown a conjuring trick, yet hopes still to catch the sleight of hand. Holmes laid the photographs before him without ceremony. Lestrade bent low, his sharp nose almost touching the prints. Well, well. These are damning enough, but who sent them? Not our murderer, surely. On the contrary, Holmes replied. Our murderer, or his accomplice. No other hand could have secured them. You see, Inspector, the photographs prove what words might fail to, that Ash was staged in death as though he were a prop in a play, and the presence of Miss Mortlake's card, pinned so conveniently, was meant to provide you with the simplest solution. That it has done so speaks not ill of you, but well of the villain's art. Lestrade bristled but held his tongue. He glanced again at the photographs. Then it is a frame. I admit it. But where do we look? Mortlake himself? This foreign fellow? The clerk Pike? Holmes rose suddenly and crossed to the window. Patience, Lestrade. Tonight we must employ a snare. Watson, do you recall the line of horsehair at the sill? That thread was not pulled from without. It was pulled from within and with purpose. Our man may believe his contrivance undetected, but we shall revive it. If we bait the trap properly, he may come to finish what he began or to recover what he left behind. It is for us to be waiting. You mean to return to Ash's chambers? I asked, precisely. The room is still warm with his presence, and the murderer's ghost has not yet faded. We shall set our watch there tonight, and I have no doubt the fog will bring our quarry to us. Lestrade frowned. And Miss Eleanor Mortlake. Her name is already being whispered at the yard. Holmes's eyes flashed. She is in danger, Inspector. Danger not merely of slander, but of silence. If the villain suspects she may speak, he will strike again. That is why we must move swiftly. Within the hour we were once more in a cab, rattling toward Lincoln's Inn through streets that grew darker with each turning. The lamps flickered in the fog, and the echo of hoofs rang strangely hollow. At the gate, Jameson admitted us with a nervous nod, and we mounted the stair to Ash's chambers. The door had been repaired with a makeshift latch, and Holmes set it open with careful hands. Inside, the room was as we had left it, save for the absence of the corpse. The desk, the curtain, the rug, all lay in that dreadful quiet peculiar to rooms where sudden death has intruded. Holmes moved with swift certainty, setting a chair behind the desk, adjusting the curtain, placing the knife upon the blotter as it had been described. He handled each item with surgical precision, as though reconstructing a specimen upon the table. There, he said at last. Our stage is ready. Now we must play our parts. Lestrade, conceal yourself behind the screen yonder. Watson, take position beside the door. I shall remain by the window. We shall see whether the spider dares to return when he finds his web disturbed. The hours crept by with leaden feet. Midnight tolled from some distant bell, muffled by fog. The chamber grew colder, the lamp sputtering. I confess my eyelids grew heavy, but Holmes's figure at the window never wavered, sharp against the dim glow. Suddenly there came the faintest scrape, like the whisper of silk against wood. Holmes raised a hand in warning. We held our breath. Another sound followed, a cautious step upon the stair. Then the latch turned softly, though no key had been given. The door opened a fraction, and in that sliver of darkness I saw the outline of a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a heavy beard glistening faintly in the lamplight. He slipped inside and closed the door behind him, moving with the sureness of one who knew every inch of the room. Holmes sprang forward with the suddenness of a striking hawk. "Your contrivance was ingenious, Vera," he cried, "but it will not save you from the gallows." The man wheeled, a gleam of steel flashing in his hand, and the quiet room erupted into struggle. The scene unfolded with a violence that would have startled even a seasoned campaigner. Vera lunged, the steel glinting in the dim light, his beard bristling like a mane. Holmes, however, had anticipated the thrust. He twisted aside with the grace of a duelist, seizing the man's wrist and sending the blade clattering to the floor. Lestrade leapt from his hiding-place, while I, acting more from instinct than strategy, hurled myself forward to bar the villain's retreat. The foreigner fought with the strength of desperation, flinging us aside as though we were but shadows. Yet Holmes clung to him with that wiry tenacity of his, dragging the man down across the rug, where the tripod's ghost still lay. For a moment it was a chaos of limbs, grunts, and oaths. Then Lestrade struck a decisive blow with his stick, and Vera collapsed to the carpet, panting, his wrists swiftly bound by Holmes with the very cord that had once served the infernal contrivance. He lay glaring up at us, his dark eyes burning with a hatred that seemed almost elemental. Holmes rose, composed as though he had merely adjusted a picture frame. "Mr. Vera, I believe?" "Photographer by trade, artificer by inclination, and assassin by profession. Your entrance was timely, though less silent than you intended." Lestrade wiped his brow. By heaven, Holmes, you've netted him neatly. But what now? He's our man, surely. Holmes shook his head. Not quite, Inspector. He is the hand, not the head. Let us not mistake the instrument for the composer. There is a larger will behind this deed, and it is that will which interests me. Vera spat a curse in a guttural tongue. Holmes regarded him with cool detachment. You see, Watson, he said softly, how violence is ever the argument of the unimaginative. Had he brains equal to his courage, he would have fled London rather than revisit the scene. But vanity drew him back. He wished to recover his apparatus, or perhaps to see whether his illusion still held sway. And vanity, Lestrade, is a cord far stronger than any horsehair. Lestrade stooped over the man. We'll see what the Yard makes of him. With this knife and his skulking about the chamber, the charge will stick well enough. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Do not be too certain. Men such as this leave little upon paper, and their tongues are oiled against inquiry. He will deny, obfuscate, and in the end claim employment by some shadowy patron. Our task is to discover that patron before he discovers that his pawn is lost. I could not restrain myself. Holmes, do you suspect Edward Mortlake? Holmes glanced at me, his mouth curving faintly. I suspect the obvious less than I suspect the forgotten. Edward Mortlake has motive, certainly, but motive alone does not yield contrivance. This affair bears the stamp of a mind that delights in mechanism. I do not yet see Edward Mortlake in that role. But let us not decide prematurely. Vera, bound and sullen, was taken away under Lestrade's orders, growling his defiance to the last. When the echoes of their departure faded down the stair, Holmes and I remained alone in the chamber, the silence pressing close once more. Holmes walked to the desk and placed a hand upon its polished surface. Consider, Watson, he said, his tone almost musing. Ash sits here drafting a letter that promises evidence decisive to the Mortlake Trust. He is slain by a device which, by its very ingenuity, was meant to confound. A card with Eleanor's initials is pinned to accuse her. And then, as though to complete the farce, I receive photographs showing the artifice in rehearsal. Why send those to me, unless the sender wished both to flaunt his cunning and to ensure that suspicion did not rest where it ought? There lies our paradox. I studied the chamber in the flickering lamplight. The curtain hung limp now. The rug still bore the marks of struggle, and the air was heavy with the scent of extinguished violence. Yet in Holmes's eyes I saw that peculiar brightness, which meant the pattern was forming in his mind. Then you think the photographs are a misdirection? I ventured. Not entirely. They are both boast and bait. Whoever sent them wished me to know of the contrivance, yet not of the instigator. That contradiction, my dear fellow, is most instructive. Vanity again. The ego of a mechanist who cannot resist showing his hand. For even as he hides his employer's face, Holmes turned suddenly to the window and examined once more the faint scrape at the sill where the horsehair had passed. And yet, he murmured, there is another shadow, one not of the foreigner's making. The card, Watson, the card. Too neatly placed, too theatrical even for Vera. I suspect that was not his doing. He is a workman, not a dramatist. The realization struck me like a blow. Then someone else entered the chamber after Ash's death. Holmes's eyes glittered. Or stood within it when the fatal stroke fell. A second hand, perhaps unseen, perhaps unsuspected. We must tread carefully, for the play is not yet concluded. We quitted the chambers in silence, the fog pressing against us like a living thing. At Baker Street once more, Holmes secured the prints, negatives, and cord into his strongbox. Then he flung himself into his armchair and closed his eyes. The smoke from his pipe wreathing upward like the tangled threads of the case. Watson, he said at last, tomorrow we must call upon Edward Mortlake again, but not as ourselves. The man is wary, and his pride will not admit confession. I shall be another figure altogether, perhaps a broker of mechanical curiosities, a tradesman who might tempt Vera's employer into careless words. Meanwhile, you must keep Eleanor Mortlake in your confidence. Watch her closely. If my suspicion is correct, she is not merely the object of accusation, but of peril. The villain may yet attempt to silence her. I promised him my vigilance, though a heaviness settled on me at the thought. It seemed to me that the web was spun wide, and the spider, though wounded, still waited at its center. Holmes, however, appeared invigorated by the very complexity of the tangle. He leaned forward, eyes bright, and uttered the words which told me the hunt had truly begun. "Tonight we have caught the hound," he said. "Tomorrow, Watson, we shall seize the master who loosed it." The following morning broke raw and wet, the rain streaking the panes like smudged ink across paper. I rose to find Holmes already at work before the mirror, a most unusual sight. His dressing table was littered with pots of pigment, false whiskers, and scraps of cloth. With quick, deft movements, he applied a thin grey streak through his dark hair, and affixed a pair of wire spectacles that altered the set of his eyes. By the time I had donned my coat, the figure before me bore little resemblance to my companion, but rather that of a weary tradesman, precise yet commonplace, the sort one would forget the instant he departed. "You are astonished, Watson," Holmes said, adjusting the knot of a dull cravat. "Not astonished, Holmes, only resigned. When I see the grease paint, I know some poor devil is about to be caught in your net." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Then let us ensure it is the right devil. Edward Mortlake must be approached without suspicion. To him I shall be Mr. Josiah Bramble, dealer in mechanical instruments, who once supplied a certain foreigner with apparatus of some ingenuity. I fancy the name alone may unseat him. You, my dear fellow, will remain as yourself. Your presence as a medical man lends us an air of legitimacy. Few imagine the physician a spy." An hour later we were in Bloomsbury once more, shown by the solemn butler into Mortlake's library. The gentleman rose from his desk with ill-concealed impatience. His lean face seemed sharper in the daylight, the lines about his mouth deepened by annoyance. "You again, Doctor? And this gentleman?" His glance slid over Holmes's altered figure, dismissive at first, then halting as though some memory had stirred. Holmes made a small bow, his voice pitched in a nasal timbre. "Josiah Bramble, sir, supplier of optical and photographic equipment. You may recall my name. My wares were once recommended to Mr. Vera. The effect was immediate." Mortlake's eyes flickered and a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Vera, what of him?" "Ah," Holmes said smoothly, producing a folded paper from his breast pocket. "He left an account unsettled. I traced his patronage to certain gentlemen of means. Imagine my surprise when I learned he had lately attached himself to your household. It seemed only courteous to bring the matter to you directly, sir." Mortlake's fingers drummed upon the desk. His gaze darted toward me, then back to Holmes. "You come at an ill time, Mr. Bramble. The man is no longer in my employ. His services proved disappointing." Holmes inclined his head, the very model of commercial patience. "Indeed, sir. That is most regrettable. His skills were not without a certain flair. A pity they were misapplied." There was a silence taut as a drawn bowstring. Mortlake's lips thinned, and I felt the weight of his suspicion shift uneasily between us. Holmes pressed the advantage with the gentlest touch. "Of course," he continued, "when men of genius fall short, it is rarely their patrons who are blamed. One might even say the patron becomes victim as surely as any other. I trust your own affairs have not been inconvenienced by Vera's rashness?" Mortlake's hand closed upon the arm of his chair. "What do you mean?" "Only," Holmes replied blandly, "that the Yard is much occupied with the death of your solicitor. Rumour speaks of foreign contrivances, of devices too subtle for ordinary men. Such whispers may cling unjustly to those of station, unless they are dispelled at once." Mortlake rose sharply, his colour high. "This is intolerable." "You come here with innuendo, sir, cloaked as a tradesman's chatter. I will not endure it. Good day." Holmes bowed once more, unruffled. "As you wish, sir. But should you wish to settle Vera's account, you know where I may be found." We withdrew under the butler's frosty eye. Once in the cab I turned upon Holmes. "Well, you have stirred the wasp's nest. But what did you glean?" Holmes removed the spectacles, his features relaxing back into themselves. Glean, Watson? Everything. His agitation at Vera's name, his attempt to disown the man yet betray knowledge of his work. Mortlake is entangled deeper than he dares confess. He financed Vera, of that I am certain. Yet whether he commanded the stroke that slew Ash, or merely sought advantage from it, remains the crucial point. And Miss Eleanor? I asked. Holmes's gaze grew grave. She stands in the eye of the storm. If Mortlake believes she suspects his dealings, he will not rest until she is silenced. We must watch her with the vigilance of sentinels. Tonight, Watson, you will remain near her house. I fear the hour is ripe for a second crime. That evening found me in Bloomsbury once again, pacing the fog-draped street outside Eleanor's residence. The lamps burned dim in the mist, and each passer-by seemed a lurking foe. Twice I glimpsed a figure across the way, tall and muffled, pausing at the corner as though to observe. When I moved toward him, he melted into the fog, leaving only the echo of retreating steps. My heart beat thick with foreboding. At last, near midnight, the door opened softly, and Eleanor herself emerged, cloaked and veiled. She started at sight of me, then hurried forward. "Dr. Watson!" Thank heaven, I feared to be followed. A note was delivered to me, unsigned, bidding me meet a messenger at Lincoln's Inn, where some papers of my uncle's are said to lie. I dared not go alone. I took the note from her trembling hand. The handwriting was disguised, but the intent plain. It was bait. "You must not go," I said firmly. "It is a snare," her eyes pleaded with me. "But if there are indeed papers, proof that my uncle meant me to inherit, how can I abandon them?" I hesitated only a moment, then resolved. "Very well. You shall not go alone. Holmes must be informed at once. Stay within until I return." I pressed her hand and hurried into the fog, my mind torn between duty to her and urgency to summon Holmes. But as I reached the corner, I glimpsed once more that shadowy figure ahead, moving swiftly in the direction of Lincoln's Inn. The game was afoot, and the snare tightening. The fog seemed to thicken with each step as I pressed on, the figure ahead no more than a wavering blot in the mist. My breath quickened, not solely from exertion, but from the dread certainty that Eleanor's note had been intended to lure her into the very jaws of danger. I dared not lose the shadow before me, yet dared not draw too near. My revolver weighed heavily in my pocket, and more than once I thought to fire a shot into the air to summon Holmes. But Holmes, I knew, prized silence as a weapon more deadly than any pistol. The streets grew narrower as I entered the precincts of Lincoln's Inn. The very stones seemed to echo with conspiracy. Lamps burned dim and few. Their light was swallowed almost at once by the smothering fog. The shadow slipped through the gateway and across the deserted square. I followed, my steps muffled, until I saw him pause at the stair leading to Ash's chambers. There he glanced behind him, and for the briefest instant the lamplight caught the heavy beard. It was not Vera, for he lay in custody at the yard, but another man, broader of shoulder, with a gait that spoke of authority rather than servitude. He vanished up the stair. I mounted after more cautiously, my hand upon the rail to steady my trembling eagerness. At the landing, the door of Ash's chamber stood ajar. A faint glow of lamplight leaked through, and I heard the scrape of wood upon wood as though a drawer were being forced. I edged closer, peering through the crack. Within, Edward Mortlake himself knelt at the desk, his face pale and strained, his hands ransacking the papers with a feverish haste. Beside him lay a small leather case, its clasps sprung, no doubt a companion to Vera's infernal apparatus. Mortlake's lips moved as though he muttered to himself, and presently he drew forth a folded sheaf of documents, which he thrust into his coat. At that instant, a shadow loomed behind me. A hand clamped my arm and a voice breathed in my ear. "Not a sound, Watson. Let him play his hand." It was Holmes. His eyes gleamed like twin sparks in the gloom, and his lips curved into that grim smile I had seen when the quarry was at bay. We watched in silence as Mortlake replaced the drawer and rose. He seemed to hesitate, then moved to the curtain where the fatal card had once been pinned. For a moment his hand hovered there, as though confirming some detail. Then he turned sharply to leave. Holmes stepped forward, striking the door wide. "Your rehearsal is clumsy, Mr. Mortlake. You lack your servant's hand with horsehair and tripod." Mortlake recoiled, his face convulsed between fear and fury. "You dare—" he began, but Holmes's voice cut him short. "I dare, sir, because I have seen enough. Your solicitor dies on the eve of producing evidence that would have ruined your claim. A foreign artificer constructs a device to mask the deed. And yet the finishing touch, the card that would cast suspicion upon your cousin, was your own, was it not? A melodramatic flourish, more suited to an amateur than to a professional." Mortlake's hand fell to the case beside him. Holmes was faster. He swept it away with his stick and thrust it to me. "Guard that, Watson. Within it lies the proof of the contrivance, as damning as any confession." Mortlake's composure broke. He lunged, his fists clenched, but Holmes met him with the quiet force of certainty. "Enough, sir. You stand revealed. Vera is in custody, and his tongue, though reluctant, will loosen when he learns you abandon him. The photograph sent to me. Ah, that was your error. You could not resist displaying the cleverness of your servant's device, yet you dared not put your name to it. Vanity, Mr. Mortlake. Vanity is the ruin of men like you." Mortlake sagged against the desk, his breath ragged. "I did not strike the blow," he gasped. Holmes's eyes gleamed with cold triumph. "Nor does the gallows distinguish between the hand that wields and the mind that commands. You supplied the motive, the patronage, and the cruel theatre in which the play was staged. Do not flatter yourself with quibbles." Lestrade, who had crept behind with 2 constables at Holmes's signal, now stepped forward and laid a heavy hand upon Mortlake's shoulder. "Edward Mortlake, I arrest you on suspicion of wilful murder." The man gave a strangled cry, half rage, half despair, and was borne away between them. His footsteps echoed down the stair and faded into the night. Holmes stood long in the chamber, silent, his eyes fixed upon the desk. At last he spoke, not to me but as though to the air itself. "It is curious, Watson, how men of station imagine themselves immune to consequence. They hire a foreign hand, they contrive a plot of exquisite ingenuity, and they believe the world will applaud their cunning. Yet it is the smallest clue, the scrape of varnish, the sway of a curtain that undoes them." I laid a hand upon his arm. "And Miss Eleanor?" He turned to me, and for once his expression softened. "She is safe now. The inheritance that is rightfully hers will be secured. And more than that, she is free from the shadow her cousin sought to cast upon her name. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall carry her the news. Tonight, let us leave this place. The air here is rank with falsehood." We stepped out into the fog, where the first paling of dawn touched the horizon. The rain had ceased, and the streets glistened like a slate washed clean. Yet in Holmes's eyes lingered a fire not yet quenched, for though the culprit was taken, I sensed he was still assembling in his mind the intricate pattern by which each thread had woven itself into the web. And I knew, as I had known in so many cases before, that only when he chose to reveal the full design would I truly comprehend the scope of the forgotten clue of Baker Street. Dawn had scarcely dried upon the pavements when Holmes drew me from my bed with a summons as crisp as a pistol shot. He had been to the yard and returned, his eyes alight with that severe joy which attends upon a mind closing fast upon its quarry. "Up, Watson, there is bread to be cut and no time for butter. Lestrade has our bearded artificer under lock, and has taken Mortlake to a cell of chill reflection. Each sings a different stave. Between the two there runs a harmony too exact to be chance, and yet—" he broke off, fastening his cuff, "and yet a note is still wanting." We breakfasted as soldiers do upon a drumhead, standing with coffee that scolded rather than comforted. As we spoke, Mrs. Hudson entered with the morning's post upon a tray. She paused, eyeing the cleared space on the mantel where the brown paper parcel had lain, and, with a housewife's persistence, returned to that which was to her a domestic affront. "I said to the lad yesterday he'd blue all over my runner." Mr. Holmes, with his filthy fingers. Chalk it was. From the parcel string, he said, "We mark our wraps with it at the rooms off Chancery Lane." Holmes's glance cut to me. "You hear, Watson? Not the General Post. Hand-carried from a shop in our very theatre of war. Blue chalk on the outer paper, blue dust on the string, and an address of a curious phrasing. I have not forgotten it. Mr. S. Holmes or his doctor. What person writes so, save one coach to expect either of us might open it?" "You believe Mortlake penned the direction?" "Mortlake would sooner cut his hand than scrawl an irregularity. He delegates his inelegancies. Feyre claims he addressed nothing, that he obeyed in silence. We must ask who taught the messenger our household's habits." Before I could frame a reply, the bell tinkled below and Lestrade was shown in, leaner than ever, a carnivorous content upon his narrow face. Both birds caged. Mr. Holmes, the foreigner, growls but gives ground. He admits to setting a device by which a loop, drawn from the window by a hairline, could jerk the bell pull, topple the chair, and fling the knife to seam the instrument. Says his patron supplied the chamber's key. Holmes nodded once. "And the card?" Vera swears it was not his notion. Says the gentleman he will not speak the name. Like to flourish. Lestrade's mouth twisted. Mortlake, for his part, keeps to his tribe's religion, law. He will not confess to the blow, only to having retained a man of science to secure a contingency. He calls it precaution. The gallows calls it murder. Holmes's gaze had drifted not to Lestrade, but to the plain rectangle upon our side table, the visiting card we had taken from Ash's curtain. He lifted it with a tenderness one reserves for the final piece of a dissembled toy. "Precaution," he repeated. "Inspector, do you recall on the first morning I breathed upon this card and saw a ghost stir within the fibre? I recall you doing something damned unaccountable." "Yes, then you shall see the account." Holmes set a small saucer upon the table and, from a stoppered vial in our chemistry cupboard, tipped a few amber crystals into it. He balanced a wire grid above the saucer and set the card upon the grid face downward. A spirit lamp flared below. Their thin, acrid sweetness rose, the unmistakable breath of iodine. "Watch, Lestrade. The iodine vapor mates with the starch of certain inks the foolish call invisible. 7 seconds, 8 there. A pale script blossomed out of the blank like frost across a pane. I bent over it and read aloud, my voice catching on the outrage of it. "Send 3 plates at once to Baker Street. Address Mr. S. Holmes or his doctor to ensure receipt. Use the Chancery rooms. E.M." Lestrade let out a long whistle between his teeth. "Well, I'll be—" That pins him to the parcel as neatly as he pinned the girl to the curtain. Holmes's smile was thin and wintry. "It does more. It resolves the smell of iodine at Ash's window. Either our patron or his tool attempted to bring up this writing upon the sill for a hasty reading, and thus left the scent for my nose. We had our solution before us on the first morning, Inspector, and we walked past it as London walks past genius, with a shrug. I confess my cheeks warmed. "You had your suspicion, then?" "I had my offence," he returned. "A card whose only overt mark was its initials, yet which took the breath as paper takes water. Why should blankness react unless it concealed? The forgotten clue of Baker Street, Watson, was not upon the inn's carpet, but upon our mantel. I own that I placed it second to the living room of the crime, and so it reproached me until I made amends. Lestrade was already scribbling. So Mortlake ordered the plates to you, devil's pride, as you said, and contrived the rest with this foreign wolf. We can put it in front of him and watch him wriggle. You may add," Holmes said gently, "that the words Chancery rooms accord with Mrs. Hudson's blue-fingered Mercury, and that the photograph prints show a rehearsal before the fatal hour. Mortlake wished to see his theatre from the pit. The troupe obliged. The inspector folded the card away as a priest might a relic. And the mechanism, Mr. Holmes. I would have it clean in my head before I recite it to a magistrate." Holmes moved to the mantel, and with the patience of a schoolmaster, drew in the air with his long finger. The tripod stood upon the rug, where we found the lighter triangle. Fixed to it a small arm with a loop of gut. The loop rested about the bell-pull's tassel. A second line ran from the arm through the minute crack at the sill, thus the scrape in the varnish, and down to the garden below, where it could be drawn at the instant. The first jerk toppled the chair and dragged Ash's body forward. The second, by a cunning hitch, snapped the bolt, whose slide had been filed to near-free running, and flung the window's curtain to stir the air. The knife? He touched his temple. It was set upon a light spring within the desk's open drawer. The toppled body released it to fall as if from a nerveless hand. Crude, but in fog and hurry sufficient to deceive. Lestrade gave a low grunt of respect. And to the devil with such cleverness. Well, we have our chain, link to link. He made for the door, then swung back. The girl, the lady, Eleanor Mortlake. Is she clear in your mind? As clear as any name slandered for a cousin's convenience, Holmes replied. But do not trumpet it in the street until the charge is laid. Men of Mortlake's stamp have long arms. They have not yet lost the hope of reaching. When the door had shut upon him, Holmes stood a moment very still, head bowed as if to listen to some internal echo. Then he turned upon me with a sudden, almost boyish energy. One task remains, my dear fellow. Pike, Ash's clerk, the same. A timid mouse, useful to cats. His wax and ink betrayed his brushing against the works. Whether out of fear or greed he gave passage to the bearded man. We must learn before nightfall. He knows where Mortlake kept his private correspondence, and if Mortlake is the kind of miser I believe him to be, he holds insurance against his hireling's tongue. Pike may be the string that draws the last bolt. We found the youth at a coffee-room off Carey Street, blinking over a cup like an owl affronted by daylight. He started at sight of us and would have bolted, but Holmes's palm upon his shoulder was gentle and inexorable. Sit, Mr. Pike. I bring you not the policeman's hand, but the surgeon's, swift and clean. You let a stranger into Mr. Ash's chambers last night, but one. You were paid for your terror, and told it would be no more than a trick. You pinned a lady's card where you were bidden. You have since pretended not to see what your hands did. If you will speak now, you may yet save more than your livelihood. The boy's eyes filled. He said, Mr. Mortlake said, it was to frighten Mr. Ash, to keep him from ruining everything with those papers. He gave me a sovereign to leave the latch off, and another to say nothing. When I came this morning and saw— He broke, covering his face. I never thought I never— Holmes's voice, when it came, was very soft. I believe you. You were a door, not a dagger. You shall tell the inspector so. But answer this. Did Mr. Mortlake ever speak of a packet to be brought to him, one he feared might fall into other hands? Pike sniffed and nodded. He told me yesterday noon that if aught arrived at Baker Street, those were his very words, I must send him word by messenger. He wrote it down, lest I blunder. He always wrote. Holmes's eyes flicked to mine. The chain's last link clicked shut. Then we are finished, he said, rising. Watson, we will call upon Miss Eleanor at noon. I think we may at last present her with the estate and her good name, both cleansed. After that I shall permit myself an hour with my violin. There is a passage of Bach that lends itself to thoughts of strings and their proper tension. He smiled, and in that spare, austere expression I read the nearness of the end. The web had been mapped, the spider plucked from it, and the one neglected thread, the card upon our own hearth, had shown itself to be the line that ran through all. By noon, the fog had lifted from the streets of Bloomsbury, leaving the gas lamps smeared with a thin sunlit haze. Holmes and I arrived at Miss Eleanor Mortlake's residence with a calmness that belied the storm we had navigated the previous night. She greeted us at the door, her eyes wide with apprehension, yet the tension in her shoulders seemed lighter, as though she sensed that the shadow which had threatened her was at last retreating. Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson, I feared you might not come until it was too late, she said, her voice trembling only slightly. Holmes inclined his head, his expression one of quiet assurance. Miss Mortlake, the peril that hung over you is removed. The person who sought to cast blame upon your name has been taken into custody, and the instigator of the scheme lies revealed." Her hands clasped mine, gratitude shining through the fear. "Then Edward, my cousin, he will answer for it." Holmes shook his head subtly. Edward Mortlake did not strike the blow himself, nor did he touch the instrument of death. Yet he orchestrated the event, engaged Vera to execute the design and contrive to frame you. Justice must reckon with him for his part, though the courts will determine the precise measure. I noted the flicker of relief in her eyes, but also the faint shadow of lingering doubt. Holmes observed her closely. "Miss Mortlake, you must understand," he continued, "that your card, placed upon the curtain, was intended as a device of misdirection. It is a testament to the cleverness of the plan that it appeared so convincing. Yet the smallest element, the iodine upon the sill, the smear of chalk upon the parcel, unraveled the entire fabrication once observed in sequence." She drew in a deep breath, as though the words themselves cleared some inner obstruction. "And the foreign man?" "Vera?" Holmes nodded. "He is confined at Scotland Yard, and under questioning has provided full particulars of his patron's design. His admission confirmed what we suspected. The intricate contrivances were his handiwork, but the motive, the direction, and the ultimate framing were assigned by Mortlake." Her gaze fell upon Holmes, full of a trust that belied the extraordinary circumstances. "And Mr. Ash's papers? They are safe?" Holmes's eyes softened for the briefest moment. "Entirely. The originals are now secure. The codicil will secure your inheritance as intended. No further hand shall interfere." A faint smile touched her lips, and I could see the tension slowly draining from her posture. Holmes, ever observant, caught the subtle change and inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging a victory neither celebrated nor spoken aloud. "Miss Mortlake," he said, "there is one final lesson in this affair, and it is not in the mechanics of the device, nor in the exposure of the culprit. It is in the observation of the smallest detail. The overlooked, the trivial, the seemingly insignificant, all may conceal the path to truth. Our fortunes turned upon a thread so fine it might have been ignored by any other eye." She looked from him to me, comprehension dawning slowly. "You mean the card, the chalk, the trace of iodine?" "Precisely," Holmes replied. "Every element had its purpose. Every action, however minor, has consequences. It is not merely the force of the act, but the precision of observation that brings resolution. Remember this, Miss Mortlake, for life often presents mysteries less clear than a murder or inheritance dispute." I noted, as she nodded, that the air between them carried a quiet admiration, a recognition of intellect and courage intertwined. Yet Holmes, true to his nature, gave it no further acknowledgment. He turned to me abruptly. "Watson, the case is concluded. The Yard will conduct its procedure. Vera will remain detained and Mortlake will face the court. Miss Mortlake will be safe. Our work for the present is complete. I think it a fitting moment to resume our ordinary life, at least until the next curious summons." The young lady's smile broadened, a mixture of relief and appreciation. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Holmes. And you, Dr. Watson. You have preserved not only my inheritance but my honor." Holmes inclined his head, the merest glint of a smile crossing his features. "Your thanks are sufficient. The world, Miss Mortlake, contains more villains than one can reasonably track, and more innocence than one might hope to safeguard. One acts where one can. In this instance, fortune and careful observation combined to produce the desired outcome. I could not resist a final question. Holmes, will Mortlake attempt to escape justice, do you think?" He considered this briefly, as though weighing distant probabilities. "He may attempt it. Men in his station often do. Yet the evidence is such that flight is unnecessary. The courts will weigh his designs against the evidence of his servant and the mechanical record left by Vera. Even if he plots upon foundations already exposed." Miss Mortlake rose, her composure now fully restored. Then I may sleep in peace tonight." Holmes inclined his head, and I noted that for once he did not immediately redirect the conversation to some theoretical abstraction or side observation. There was a brief serenity in the room. The tension of the previous days momentarily dissolved. As we departed, the street sun glimmered upon the wet stones, and I could not help but reflect on the intricate precision with which Holmes had unravelled the web. From a locked room, a misplaced card, and a trace of chalk, he had revealed an entire design, exposed the manipulations of a scheming cousin, and saved an innocent life from the machinations of a calculating mind. Walking back toward Baker Street, Holmes's pace was brisk, his mind already elsewhere, though the satisfaction in his step was unmistakable. "Watson," he said at last, "the human mind in its vanity and ambition leaves behind threads which, if one observes carefully, guide us unerringly to truth. We are fortunate to have observed them in time." I could only nod, knowing that, as always, his triumph was quiet yet absolute. The city resumed its ordinary bustle around us, unaware of the intricacy of the battle fought within its misted streets. The subtle hand of justice guided by the most acute eye Baker Street had ever known. Thus the case of the forgotten clue of Baker Street reached its conclusion, a testament to observation, patience, and the inexorable triumph of intellect over artifice. Holmes had unveiled the hidden design, restored justice, and in so doing left both law and honor intact. As we crossed the threshold of 221B once more, I knew that the city, with all its fog and shadows, had surrendered yet another secret to his unsurpassed discernment. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of 221B Baker Street, gilding the room with a warmth that belied the tension of the past week. Holmes sat in his chair, violin laid aside, fingers steepled, eyes fixed upon the fire as though it held the answer to some question only he could see. I placed the last of the photographs, notes, and parcels upon the table and poured 2 cups of tea, mindful of the rare calm that preceded his exposition. "Watson," he began, his voice carrying the deliberate clarity that always signaled the coming summation. "It is a curious thing how murder, however artfully devised, leaves behind a trail of inevitabilities. We observed the locked room, the sway of the curtain, the faint thread along the window-sill, the misplaced button upon the carpet. Each, trivial in isolation, formed a lattice upon which the truth rested." I leaned forward, noting his intensity. "And the card? The chalk?" "These were indeed pivotal?" Holmes allowed a faint smile. "Most assuredly. The card's initials were intended to divert suspicion to Miss Eleanor Mortlake. The blue chalk upon the parcel, a seemingly inconsequential mark, revealed its origin from the very building where the contrivance was rehearsed. These elements, minor yet precise, guided our observation, leading from Ash's death to the ultimate culprit. He rose, pacing the room, hands clasped behind him. "So now consider the sequence. Mr. Ash, a solicitor of meticulous habit, prepares evidence that would secure Miss Mortlake's inheritance. His cousin Edward, driven by avarice, hires Vera, a foreign artificer, to construct a mechanical device, a tripod rigged with cords and pulleys to simulate motion, toppling the chair and flinging the knife in a manner that suggests self-infliction or accident. Ash falls victim to the device, his life ending by artifice rather than direct assault." Holmes's gaze swept the room to my face, compelling attention. "Vera executed the mechanism with mechanical perfection. Yet it is Edward Mortlake who provided motive, direction, and the flourish, the card pinned to the curtain, the staged appearance of evidence. Vera is the hand. Edward Mortlake is the mind. Both are guilty, but only one orchestrated the deception for personal gain." I nodded, piecing together the subtle clues that had lain beneath the surface. The rehearsal photographs, the small thread of horsehair, the half-print of a lady's boot, each a silent witness. So the very details that seemed trivial were the master key. "Exactly, Watson," Holmes said. "Observe how human vanity assists detection. Mortlake could not resist the final flourish, the card, the staged demonstration via photographs. In doing so, he betrayed himself, leaving the path straight to his design. Even the supposedly insignificant parcel upon our mantel held the revelation of intention. The forgotten clue of Baker Street was not forgotten by us. It simply awaited proper scrutiny. He paused and tapped the table. Vera confessed fully under examination. Mortlake attempted to distance himself, yet his voice, gestures, and hesitation were the instruments of conviction. Pike, the timid clerk, provided corroboration of Mortlake's instructions, how the latch was left disengaged, the card positioned, and the contrivance set. The chain is complete, linking motive, means, and opportunity. Justice is assured. A faint knock interrupted, and Mrs. Hudson entered with a letter. Holmes tore it open, scanning quickly. A small smile crept over his features. Miss Mortlake writes to express relief and gratitude. She is safely restored to her inheritance, and the law will secure her rights without further disturbance. Note, Watson, how quickly order can follow disorder when observation guides action. I poured myself a cup of tea, reflecting on the case. It seems almost too neat, Holmes, that everything fell into place. Not too neat, my dear fellow, Holmes replied. Merely precise. Nature and human character are never so generous as to repeat themselves identically. Yet here we had one cunning mind and one mechanical contrivance. Our task was to read between the lines, to see the invisible ink upon human action, and to follow it with patience. That is the essence of detection. He sat back in his chair, resting his long fingers upon the arm. The city moves on, oblivious to the design revealed in its alleys and chambers. Edward Mortlake is apprehended, Vera detained, and an innocent woman's name restored. The lesson endures. No trick, no mechanical marvel. No web of misdirection can withstand the scrutiny of observation, applied with reason. I poured another cup, the quiet of the room settling upon us like a cloak. Holmes for once was silent, lost in thought, yet contentment radiated from his posture. Outside, London continued its ceaseless rhythm, unaware of the intricate sequence of events unravelled in the chambers of a single solicitor, yet now ordered by the precise mind of Sherlock Holmes. Watson, he said at last, lifting his gaze, the world offers endless puzzles. Some are petty, some are grand. This one, the case of the forgotten clue of Baker Street, reminds us that even the smallest mark, the faintest trace, the most trivial oversight, may carry the weight of truth. It is in these subtleties that the keenest intellect prevails. I nodded, fully aware that in Holmes's hands, reason and patience had restored justice, unveiled deception, and revealed the elegant architecture of a crime that seemed at first glance utterly impossible. The case concluded, yet the sense of wonder it evoked would remain with me always, a testament to the triumph of observation, logic, and the singular genius of Sherlock Holmes. And so, the mist of Baker Street lifted, the city resumed its ordinary rhythm, and I as always remained in awe of my friend, the man who saw the invisible and rendered the obscure plain, leaving the world, if not always wiser, at least safer by the measure of his intellect.